Well, welcome to the Friday Bubble. Today is all about Charles Heidsieck and a new release of the 2014 vintage, the Blanc de Millénaires, Blanc de Blanc, a fabulous champagne which demonstrates the Côte de Blanc at its very best. So why have there only been 8 vintages, I hear you say, since in the last 40 years? And it's largely to do with some really fascinating times through the Charles Heidsieck history. If we go back to 1976, then Joseph Henriot bought the house of Charles Heidsieck at that time. He obviously was the owner of the Henriot Champagne House and decided he needed a little bit more of a challenge. At the time, Charles Heidsieck was seen as an underperforming house. So Joseph took it on, and with him he took his winemaker. And this was where Daniel Thibault entered the frame, a very famous winemaker at Charles Heidsieck. And it's fascinating to see that from when he took over in 76, through the 80s, through the 90s, and he stayed until he retired in 2002. And he was responsible for obviously some of the big things that happened during that time. This was obviously his creation. The very first one was 1983 with this label, but he did make one in 1981, which wasn't called Blanc de Millénaires, but was the forerunner of the very first vintage. The most famous champagne that Daniel created was obviously Champagne Charlie, dedicated to the original founder of Champagne, Charles Heidsieck. The first vintage obviously being 1979, and it all finished by 1985. So there was quite a lot happening while Daniel was the chef de cave. He created the Blanc de Millénaires, the first vintage in 83, obviously Champagne Charlie. But unfortunately, 9 years after Joseph Henriot bought the company, he sold it, and he sold it obviously at I'd imagine a handsome profit to Remy Cointreau. Remy then owned the business for many years until 2011. But during that time, we have to remember when Remy owned it, they also owned Champagne Krug. So there wasn't a need in the Charles Heidsieck stable for too many prestige cuvées. And obviously with Blanc de Millénaires and Champagne Charlie and Krug's portfolio, they had a lot of them. And that's one of the main reasons that you don't see many vintages during the Remy Cointreau time. Now, fast forward a little bit further, I'm sure everybody remembers the 1995 Blanc de Millénaires, stayed in the market for many, many years, a fabulous champagne. And then obviously a small run of them with 4, 6 and 7, and then a big jump to 14. Another landmark date is really 2011. The EPI group, under its founder Christopher Descours, bought Charles Heidsieck. And again, Charles Heidsieck was pretty run down at that point after being in Remy Cointreau's hands for many years. So Christopher Descours invested in the people, in the vineyards, and in the winemaking. And then really from 2011 onwards was very much a revival time to this day where we are today. So if we have a look at the Blanc de Millénaires, it's really a showcase of Chardonnay from the Côte de Blanc. And the Côte de Blanc is obviously mostly southeast facing slopes, and it's beautiful chalk. And often you don't have to go very far below the surface to get through the topsoil and into varying degrees of hardness of the chalk below. So this is from 4 of the Grand Cru villages and 1 Premier Cru. So the 4 Grand Crus are the famous, obviously Millenaires, Sur Auger, Avize, Auger itself, and Cramont. And then Vertu is the 1 Premier Cru village, which everyone says this is quite an old classification. If this was done again today, then Vertu would really be considered a Grand Cru village as well. So the fascinating thing, there's been 3 winemakers involved in this particular wine. During Daniel's time, he trained 2 other winemakers. One of those was Régis Camus, but the other one was Thierry Roset, who started in 1988 as a trainee and then took over as official chef de cave in 2012. So in 2014, this was made by Thierry. Unfortunately, he passed away after the harvest. And it wasn't until the spring of the following year that the second chef de cave, Cyril Brun, joined Charles Heidsieck at that point and blended this wine. So Cyril blended it Cyril left in spring 23, so Elise Losfelt, who's the current chef de cave, has finished the wine and done the dosage. I opened this an hour before we're tasting this, so it should make my job easier in how I describe it. 2014 as a vintage then, it wasn't actually a particularly easy year. There was difficulty in the spring and flowering time. There was a lot of moisture during the early part of the summer, and it was really only saved in 2014 by September. Harvest started as early as the 8th of September in the region. It was a large crop, so 11,500 kilograms a hectare. But the good thing was the September sunshine really saved the harvest, especially for Chardonnay. Things like Millenaires in the Valley de la Marne were much more challenging, but we didn't have to worry about that, obviously, here in this location. In terms of winemaking, it's really pretty simple. So it's all made stainless steel, there's no oak at all here. And we're lucky in 2014, there was quite high acidities in the year. So the champagne, I'm hoping, both because of its chalk origins of the subsoils and because of the vintage, should be that beautiful combination of warmth, giving it lots of lovely tropical notes, and vibrancy from both the chalk, the energy that comes through from the chalk, and also the natural acidity in the champagne. So let's have a little go. I'm tasting in the Lehmann Synergy today because I felt it needs a bit of space when it's this young. Oh, and I'm glad I have tasted in a big glass because it's now just starting to emerge. So there's really beautiful kind of lemon and grapefruit, but those really rich, ripe lemons and grapefruits. I just got a hint of Turkish delight as well, which I wasn't really expecting to get. So it's fascinating. I didn't expect all that Turkish delight. It's really prominent. There are lovely tropical notes. I always refer to pineapple, but it's this grilled, barbecued pineapple. It's like slightly smoky. Probably guava and a bit of mango in here. It's really quite delicious. One of the reasons I love Blanc de Blanc is it just has that lightness. It kind of like sort of dances on your palate. The fruit just explodes in this. I'm really glad I've opened it an hour before. All those same fruits that I've just described. The texture's rather beautiful. This has had 8 years lees aging, obviously blended in spring of 2015. This was disgorged in the summer last year. So it seems to have had perfect time. The lees texture is really rather beautiful. A little bit of dosage, 9 grams. You actually can't notice the dosage at all here. Very well put together. Beautiful bubbles and everything are just sort of really light, really delicate. This is, again, I think, with all that freshness and acidity, this is one of those champagnes I think we could see aged for quite some years. I don't see a need. It's rather beautiful now, but it's all that primary fruit. If you taste the 95 at this point, you obviously got all those dried fruits and creaminess comes out. So if I'm scoring this, I'd probably go something like an 18.5 out of 20 I would go. And the only other person I can see that's tasted it so far is Tom Hewsonl, who's written it up for Decanter. He's given it a 95. So I think, there are some good numbers behind it. Acidity is certainly no problem in this vintage. Beautiful ripeness, and I hope you all get a chance to taste this quite soon. Cheers, everybody.